Hey, it's Stu, and this is going to be a reading wrap up. I will give my thoughts, likes, dislikes, maybe a little bit of a synopsis of a substantial amount of reading that I've done since my last video. I keep thinking that I'm going to make short forms one by one and or start a story graph, but for now, this is satiating my need to kind of just talk about my books a little bit before I let them go. As I, if you don't already know, unhaul all of my books. I read them and then I pass them along. No One is Coming to Save You by Stephanie Powell Watts. I got this when I was in San Diego, and I think I looked up a little bit what it was about, but by the time I started listening to it, because I did this almost exclusively on audio, I just found that like doing it during my walks or workouts was really working for me. So this one was kind of like an extended experience. So I think I looked up what was it about, but then I got into it and I couldn't remember the synopsis at all. I've since looked up some reviews, and I guess this was marketed as a Great Gatsby retelling, and maybe I knew that about it, and maybe it's better that I forgot. There are some parallels to the Gatsby, and I think that's worth noting, but to suggest that this is a retelling maybe is to give homage to some of the parallels, but it's not like it's highly adapted, and appropriately, I think. I think this book, if you look on Goodreads, for example, doesn't necessarily get fantastic reviews, but I think that it had to do with that. Like, people are like, oh, I'm going to go in and read Gatsby. And there are some Gatsby-isms in it, but it's harder to, I think I would, if I had expected like some kind of a closer to the original Gatsby retelling, that might have impacted me in a negative way. I didn't find that out until later, and then once I was like, oh yeah, I can see that parallel and that parallel, but a retelling, again, maybe to give homage where credit is due. I liked the characters in this book. I thought they were pretty fleshed out. We have a family or a couple of families, we have multiple generations. We have women making do with what they can and how they can, with some men and some love interests that aren't serving them particularly well. There's a lot of like fraught experiences with these women and men. There's also some commentary in this book around fertility and childbearing. There's some commentary for sure. This takes place in one of the Carolinas. I think it's North Carolina, and it's during the Obama period, but kind of spanning from post Jim Crow to the Obama period, and there are some certainly racial issues or racial realities explored in this book, in particular in that geographical area. I thought that the characters were pretty well fleshed out, and I could really kind of get into the heart and mind of some of the women characters. Overall, a solid read. I'm glad that I read it. Antibot by Sierra Greer. This is a book about the patriarchy, misogyny, toxic masculinity, and it's all told through like a speculative fiction where we have a sentient robot that is programmed, so it's AI, and it can learn. And it becomes then more and more human-like, or adapts some kind of humanity. But the robot is a machine, so there is a little bit of commentary about AI in its place. But more than anything, it's really looking at how women are objectified in the patriarchy. And this particular character, who's only one character, whose name is Doug, is a repulsive abuser. And I think the book actually perhaps did too much in trying to raise some awareness or shine a light on Doug himself's humanity. And because he is indeed a human, and humans are incredibly flawed, but in the end of the day, especially as he's like the representation of the misogyny, patriarchal misogyny, it gave maybe a little too much credit. There were some moments when I was like, no, like, he's just vile, and there doesn't need to be anything more than the internal workings of this robot that's learning, trying to learn, who's programmed to please, and is trying to learn how to please somebody who is just a tyrant, who just hates this robot for being a robot in a female body. And so I think this is a really stark look at it. And I feel like I kind of needed it after some of the books that I'm going to talk about as well. And it just, as a full work, it was just a little bit short of what I really, really wanted and needed from it. But in overall, like, what it set out to do, I thought that it did quite well. I think it's not very long. It's very accessible as a read. Like, I sat down and read it in a sitting. Today, actually, I just finished this book in a very hot day. And I think that makes this book quite commercially viable. And therefore the themes pretty more, gonna reach wider audiences is what I'm trying to say. And I can see this being like a fantastic book club book. All the Mothers by Domenica Ruda. This book, I went into this book totally blind as well. I didn't know what to expect. At the beginning, there was like two mothers, and what it's called is a mummune. We have, this is the story of single mothers who have children, all to the same father. And again, I think that these mothers and this author did a lot of work to try to show the humanity of this deadbeat scumbag father. And I think the book gave him way too much grace. I am kind of coming across as angry, but I think rightfully so. He's a deadbeat, and they're trying so hard, as women, fatally do, to like make sure that the siblings have the siblings in their lives, and also the father and the grandmother, the father's mother, at their own expense. They're constantly the ones sacrificing so that can happen. And I think that's the intention of Domenica Ruda's work, is to show how much sacrifice women do all of the time, and thanklessly. I mean, even in as much as that I'm sort of criticizing the work for that, I think the work itself could have been way harsher on Justin, I believe, is the name of this sort of like this deadbeat wannabe like guy who sires children to these three women, and these three women get together and work together to raise their kids. I was in a similar situation in my life where I also lived with another single mom, and we worked together to pick up, drop off, make meals, just as a team to raise our children. So it was a very sort of like personal reading experience for me, even though some of the other sort of drama in this book, it wasn't my story. It was different. This book is set in New York City, and this book, there's also a romance. It's like, I would call this a domestic fiction, a women's fiction. I think it's classified as chick lit, and I guess that, and even when I'm like talking through this feminist lens, just really rubs me the wrong way. Because what if we replace that C with a D and said that lit for all of the obscene male authors that still dominate priceless, etc. In any case, I would consider this contemporary domestic fiction with a strong romance. Also, would probably be a pretty dang good book for a book club, if people want to explore the sort of like the way these three different women approached the problem, and I'll call it a problem, of the father. And I will give credit, like, not fully fleshed, like this doesn't waltz into literary fiction in my opinion, but it is literary enough to give like enough character development and insight that these three women are developed as three different characters who have three different sort of like backgrounds and personalities and ways in which they work together. And I think that's explored a little bit less. It's more explored the ways in which they deal with the problem, which is the man, the father. Sandwich is by Catherine Newman. Here we have a story that takes place in 1 week. Our narrator is, and protagonist is a middle-aged woman who is, her children are grown and gone. She's married to a man. They're still together, and her parents are elderly, and she's she's not their caregiver, but she has worries and concerns for her aging parents, who also, so this 1 week they're in Cape Cod, where they have gone every year for the last 2 or 3 decades. I don't relate with Cape Cod stories at all, but there is something about the menopausal journey that was it was confronted completely and thoroughly in this book that I deeply appreciated. I thought that this mother, the main character, was really fleshed out, and her worries and her preoccupations were well done. They're like almost bridging on a little bit of stereotypes to tell some of the story, even about like menopause and the hormonal reactions that this particular woman's had. But I only say that because there's just like, what have I read? One book where like one of the key themes is menopause, like one. So, I mean, maybe if I had as many books about that as of coming of age for young men that I was subjected to growing up with my life, I would be like, okay, here's all of the different ways in which women handle menopause, as you know, different bodies and different life experiences handle it different. The writing about menopause as a theme really worked. There was also and I wish I could find it, and I don't want to make this video too long and actually read the passage that really hit me, where this author is philosophizing a bit, and she's contemplating just the amount of lack of autonomy that women have on their bodies. That the bodies are just sort of out to get us, and we live in a society that's not copacetic to all of the things, like deciding to have a baby, deciding not to have a baby, menopause, periods, just all of the things that happen in female bodies that are made even more challenging by the way in which we're taught to think, feel, and society handles bodies. There's also a lot of commentary in here about, speaking of body autonomy, about reproductive rights, and I thought it was very solid in that this protagonist feels a lot of regret and guilt about having an abortion, and she's incredibly liberal. In fact, she's helped and worked and advocated and been a social justice warrior in the realm of women's reproductive rights her whole life. And she's discussing with her daughter, you know, like her daughter feels like she shouldn't feel guilty, that's fodder for the conservative fire. And she's like, no, that's actually how I felt. And it's still like a choice that I made, and I believe in the choice, but that's the experience that I had. And I thought that was there was nuance, and there was depth, and there was honesty in that telling as well. So I thought that this was going to be like a cozy, frilly breach read, and it wasn't. it wasn't not that, but there was more depth to this book. And I think if I find Rec, which I believe is same protagonist, maybe back home, not in Cape Cod, then I would be interested in reading Rec as well. The Book Eaters by Sunyi Dean. Okay, almost every book, including Mothers, every book so far, except with the exception of No One's Coming to Save Us, I've done hybrid. So I don't sleep. Speaking of menopause, but also just a life thing for me, I don't sleep very well or very much at night. So when I can't sleep, I don't torture myself. I go to a different place in my own bed and I listen to a book until I start to feel like, now's a good time to try again. And so I listen to these books, usually start them in the middle of the night or in the morning when I'm doing my morning chores, and then go on to read them out in the sun sometime in the evening or afternoon. So that's what happened with this book. I listened to quite a bit of it. Actually, it was a pretty sleepless night, and then I read. So I would say almost 50-50 in this book. The premise, I was explaining this book to my child, and I was like, the premise, it was a bit cringy for me. The premise is that there is a group of like alien entities and they eat books. That's where they get all of their knowledge, and they need to eat books. But there's another faction of them that actually have to eat humans' brains. They like have this little, like what the anteater has. There's a word for that, but use my charades here, that goes, up into the human brain and sucks it all out. And so they're called dragons. So this is fantasy, a completely fantasy world, but they also living amongst humans. And we're following a mother and her child who is there are very few women, and there are very few of these creatures. So they've constructed a society where the women are set to have arranged marriages, and they're transported amongst the families to make sure that there's no genetic drift can happen, and they're not allowed to raise their girl children. Their girl children are raised by male members of the families, and the women are also taken to another house or family for arranged marriages until their fertility is no longer done, and then they become like aunties, and their role is to be midwives. Our main character rebels against all of that. She's distraught in having been separated from her first child. So she, when her second child is born, a dragon, and he's just going to be sedated and trained, and completely and totally oppressed, but in this, so that he doesn't have to eat brains. She finds a way to cleverly work the system and try to escape. There's ace representation in this. There's queer rep in this, and I would say there's a lot of commentary on ableism. Yeah, in this book. This is very much a fantasy that helps take a long critical look on how society is incredibly ableist and sexist in its structures. There were times when I thought, wow, this book just doesn't fully work, or I don't know if I really, really like this book or if I would recommend it. But then at the end, and isn't it strange when you hear someone talk about their work? I was like, I wasn't throwing it. I finished it. I wasn't like, this is terrible. I was just kind of undecided. I didn't know. I thought it was a little, like, the premise was a little cringy for me, and the execution kind of missed in a few places. And, it's okay. Not everything has to be like just amazing. But in the end, the author, who, according to the bio, is autistic, found a reader. And I really liked listening to it because it was a Northern English accent, which, according to, at the end, the narrator and the author have a discussion, and they sort of like interview each other about their art. And it was very much like that. Like, the author was like, I'm so in awe of you, and you're like, what did you have to do to prepare to be like the reader, the voice actor of this? And there was a lot of talk of the process on both the writing of the book, but also, like, I'm going to call it an adaptation, even though it's not quite that, but the reading of the book, and the dialogue between the two was just absolutely precious. So if you read this book, because I don't think it's in this edition. Yeah, no. If you read this book and you have access to it on audio, like I got it from my library, at least listen to that dialogue between Senia Dean and the narrator, whose name I don't remember, quite shamefully, right now. All right, I have to speed up because it's already 21 minutes and I'm not even halfway through. Will and Testament by Vigdis Hjorth. I had read Long Live the Post Horn, and the Long Live the Post Horn, the epitaph started with the epigraph. Anyway, it started with a Kierkegaard quote, and I knew I was just in for it. It was like, I think one of the blurbs says it was an existential scream, and indeed it was. So I found the writing just beautiful, but the book was like almost too existential for me. I was wondering if I was going to have a similar experience with Will and Testament, but I also have to say, for some reason, I thought this was about 4 friends and a summer cottage. It's not. This is extremely heavy material. It is a beautiful book. This is probably one of the best written books. Like, the craft of this book is phenomenal for me, and like highly ranked, like one of my top books that I would say is the best written. And that makes me also contemplate, to whom will I pass this book along? Because I think that this is the kind of book that needs a little bit of like, I highly recommend you read this book, and here are the reasons why. And that's further compounded that this book is incredibly activating. It could be a really traumatic experience for any survivor of domestic violence and/or SA. In this book, we have a protagonist who has been assaulted by her father, and she finds herself in her 50s, like estranged from her family for 20 years. She's decided that she has to just become estranged. And this is after many years of psychotherapy and, just deciding that for her own health, and in order to be able to raise her children, she needs to estrange herself from her family. Now it's come to the end. Her father's 85 and he passes away, and there's a bit of a kerfuffle amongst the siblings about the will. And the will has to do with some summer cottages, and the two oldest siblings, so this protagonist and her brother, who's of similar age, have been written out of having the cottages, under the guise that they just haven't been, and the younger siblings have been with the parents and at the cottages. And the brother really wants to fight. He thinks that's really unfair, and is even in violation of some of the fair inheritance law in Norway. And our protagonist, Bridget, I think, doesn't like. It's not the lack of fairness. It's like this moment when she wants her family to just admit what happened to her. And they just won't. The mother won't. The siblings won't. It's so infuriating, and it's so excruciating to watch the philosophical, the existential, the internalized grief and even doubt of herself that this protagonist feels. And then she'll be like, no, wait. And she'll get her ground again. Like, what if, why are they being like this? And what if it's me? And then she'll catch it again. And she has a friend named Clara. And I think that name, meaning clarity, was well picked, who kind of really helps. It gives a really sound advice. Great book, just great book. It's so just tense, though it's written almost like a mystery, like a suspense, but with this heavy theme, and then with these sort of like also existential, like rabbit holes that kind of happen throughout it. Yeah. If any of that sounds compelling, read this book. I think you should give this book a chance if you're a lit fic reader at all. But again, totally understand if reading about, surviving abuse as a child isn't for you, then take care, please. The Banyan Moon by Tao Tai. This is a multi-generational story. So we have 3 generations of women who are grandma and mom and daughter. Grandma, mom, and daughter. Grandma, mom immigrated from Vietnam. So mom was old enough to remember, and then daughter was born in the South. So it's in Florida. There's a house with a banyan tree, and that's why, ergo the name. This was written in first person from each character, and I think that served to just kind of show the inner struggle, so that it wasn't just like the drama happening outside. However, I thought that it lacked a little in like what's the actual internal dialogue, like fleshing out the characters. That being said, it showed this sort of like rift, this generational rift between those 3 generations, and what that kind of, how that played out as they found a way to live and grow and thrive in American society. There's a lot of, this reminds me, and it's similar in a lot of ways to this book, and that the men are just not great. They're not great partners to these women, and these women need each other and themselves to find a way to make it. There's kind of a twist in this book that I was like, wow, I don't know if I saw that coming, and I don't know what to do with that. So if you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. I felt like that wasn't fully fleshed out, and I think I don't know if it fully helped the story, but it did show the extent to which people will go to save their families and to survive. So I guess in that, but as sort of like a plot point, it wasn't completely fleshed out. This is another probably pretty decent book club book. There's plenty to talk about in here, about sort of like multiple generations of family, mothering, what it's like to be in a diaspora or an immigrant, and also, the extents that people go to protect their family. Britt Marie Was Here by Fredrik Backman. This is a translated novel because he writes in Swedish, so the translator is Henning Kosh. I hybrided this as well. I almost hybrid all, if not listen to the Backman books. For some reason, I like to listen to them. I think the narrators do quite a good job. This one I found more cloying than the others. I had already met Britt Marie in My Grandmother Told Me to Say She's Sorry, and I liked her as a character. She's more fleshed out in this. This is her, Liz. We get to find out a lot about her and how she is. And I think she stays true. Fredrik Backman has a great way of writing people that are outcasted by societies or who are different than the societal structural norm, and sort of really getting to know them and seeing some of what's seen as their, like, what would be their flaw actually as their strength, or what makes them a unique person and the heroine in this case of the story. However, there were some times I was like almost a little too gimmicky, but you know, this is my 4th Backman book, so I'm already a Backman fan, and I wouldn't suggest starting with this. In fact, I would suggest definitely reading My Grandmother Told You to Tell You She's Sorry before you read this, because I feel like that's the right order in which to do it. But no regrets in having read it. And sometimes because he does have that sort of like heartwarming, you kind of leave it feeling warmed in the heart. I think that I needed that given some of the reads that I was reading around it. So Clear by Carrie Davies. This is a delightful book. I can highly recommend this little book. It takes place in Scotland. It has, definitely read the author's notes, because there's some historical research, or there's this historical premise of when the Church of Scotland had a bit of a separation that's going on, and then there's some clearings of people off of the islands, and this is one of those books that it's not very long, but the commentary that it's making on the history, unveiling the history of the clearings. In this, we have a minister who has separated from the church, and he needs a little bit of money to start his parish or his whatever ministers do. So he agrees to be the hired person to go to this isolated island and get, basically serve the papers to the last resident on it to let him know that he's going to be displaced. There's a lot of like mental justification that's happening between the minister and his wife of like, no, this is better for that guy, and you know, this is a good right thing to do. And I thought that was such a good insight on how, you know, otherwise good people justify really bad things by calling them good. But when he gets to the island, this minister, he falls down a cliff, and then he's nursed back to health by the one resident that he's kind of there to demise. And thus ensues some intimacy between him and his nurse, really the person who saves him. So I'll can say his savior, and you know, some drama, which I can't say without spoiling the book, but that is to say, there's plenty of commentary in this book, but there's also plenty of plot, and there's plenty of atmosphere, and it's not very long. So if you like those things, and it's historical fiction, so I feel like it checks a lot of boxes, and it would be a pretty good read for a lot of readers. Carolina de Robertis Cantores. This is one of those stories that just needed to be told, and where I just wanted it to be better written. That's just me. Like, the writing was fine. It was more than fine, but I think that Carolina de Robertis is a translator as well. And this is a story, again, that just needed to be told. So it's written in a very accessible way. And I have to really give all of the respect to those aspects that's due. And I just wanted it. I would have liked it to be a little bit more literary fiction, and there'll be a little bit more craft in the authorship of this book. This story is about Uruguay, and it's told during the tyrannical dictatorship of military. There was a military. It wasn't a coup. I think that it was the generals got the president to sign over power, and then they signed over power for the generals signed over power for immunity. But I think it spanned 20 years, and there was a lot of crimes against humanity and political prisoning and surveillance and fear. And in that landscape, we have the story of a group of women who are cantoras, and cantoras is a word for lesbians, and they are subversive before, during, and after, because even after the fall of the demise of the dictatorship, they still couldn't be fully out. That came years later. They just didn't live with that, with the fear of the dictatorship on top of. And I thought this book did a great job of showing that. It also showed just what trauma can do, but also the joy and love of a sisterhood. I liked the characters in this book. I think, again, this is a story that just needs to be told. I'm glad that I got to be one who experienced the telling of it. And I thank Carolina de Robertis for getting it to me via the medium of this book. Although as I said, I wished it would have been a little bit more literary fiction, the accessibility of it. I hope that, I feel like this is a really easy read. And by that, I mean, it just straightforward story. So accessible to many, if not most readers. So, if you're not reading stories about Latin America or by queer authors or queer stories regularly, then perhaps put it on your Pride reading. It's worth it for that. Let me take a little detour into the 2 digital books that I had, and then I'll do the last 2 books. Okay, so I read this short stories by Julia Elliott, which was Hellions. Did this win a prize? This won a prize. I feel it was a prize, Dylan Thomas Prize for young authors. In any case, without the discussion of prize winning, I found this fantastic. These short stories were really compelling, engaging, and interesting. They were quite genre bending. They were somewhere between fantasy with some horror tropes, with some with just sort of like literary fiction. It's very literary. They're very literary. There's a lot of poetic language. In fact, the footnotes are worth looking into. It did remind me quite a bit of Carmen Maria Machado's work in the genre bending ways. What I can also say about short story collections, whenever I read them, and now I have been for the last couple of years, like all the way through, for some reason, I cannot really remember them. And that's true of the books that I knew, like Heads of Colored People and the book by Carmen Maria Machado. Well, I can't remember the name of it right now. But those were great. Ray Bradbury. I read a collection of short stories by Ray Bradbury, and I remember loving all of them. And I can remember little snippets, but if I had to sit and give you an anthology of the stories, or even a synopsis of some, if not most of the stories in them, I couldn't do it. And it's such a weird thing about reading the whole collection of short stories, because I can tell you when I was reading and all I could read was a short story from the New Yorker or from a Great American Short Stories anthology, I could almost tell you the whole synopsis of short stories that I've read, 15, 20 years ago, when I kind of read it in isolation. But when I read these collections, especially when I'm reading them in and amongst novels, I'm enjoying myself. I have strong recollections of if I liked it or didn't, or sort of what element I liked about it or not, but what the actual details, they get completely fuzzy with short stories. So definitely recommend it. Read it. Had a great time. If you liked Carmen Maria Machado's short story collection, then you'll really like this book. And if you like sort of like really poetic prose with some kind of wackadoodle stuff going on, Hellions is for you. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Yesteryear by Carl Claire Burke. You can tell that I don't have to worry about a super popular channel or socials. Otherwise, I would have put that first because that's such a hyped book. I have to admit, I fell into the hype. I was like, okay, let me go ahead and see what this book is about. There were elements of the synopsis, which is that this is about a social media persona brand, like a brand of social media personas called Tradwives. And they go on social media and they film their families and discuss how to bake pies and live a traditional life as a wife and mother. And to be honest, like, besides I'm saying this ironically because I'm about to put this video on social media. I'm like totally not into the social media phase. I actually have a member of my family who has many, many children and who lives a very traditional life where they're milking cows and gathering eggs, and there's no social media involved at all. That's just the life that this family member lives. So I find it's just such an interesting trend to market to urban folk. It's also such an interesting trend to be politicized. I thought that there could be interesting, because of those two frameworks that I came into it with, it could be some interesting commentary. And in the beginning, it was reminiscent of the woman from Utah who was then put in prison for child abuse. I mean, sort of like was giving those sort of vibes. And then there's this like element of the book. So there's kind of two timelines where she suddenly finds herself in the 1800s, the mid 1800s, when she's supposed to be simulating this traditional life and how she's handling it. So I thought, okay, this book has now gotten itself into some kind of like magic realism or fantasy element, and it isn't written like that. And how's it going to get itself out? I won't spoil it, but what I will say is it did not deliver the ending for me. It got itself out in a way that I was just like, no, I'm sorry. No, there's like nothing to be learned or thought about for myself in this book. Obviously, for lots of people, there is. I found the writing okay, mediocre. But it didn't necessarily, there wasn't any elements of the writing that were so like distracting other than the plot, other than the plot of the book. The plot and the premise. They're completely distracting. They didn't work at all. Anyway, I don't intend to yuck anybody's yums. People love that book, or people are just, that book is so hyped. I feel like it's almost a bias. Like, I reject hype so much that I'm surprised that I read it. But of course, I live out here in society and I didn't, want to be able to like miss having something intelligent to say with other people that gathered something from it. So if somebody wants to talk to me about that book and what they really liked, I'd appreciate hearing it. I'm not going to be like, oh no, I thought it was terrible, to their face, unless they insist that I share my opinion. Nightcrawling by Layla Motley. This was written, this is a debut, and it has elements of debut, and that's the only, like, since I'm kind of spinning off of some negative things, that's the only negative thing I'll say. This book surprised me. I also did not know what it was about. Upon reading the author's note, I was like, yes. We have a young protagonist who's 17 when we meet her, and she's just got a lot of hardships to confront and overcome in her life. Her mother's in prison. Her father's deceased. She and her brother's 18, and they're trying to make it. They're trying to make it out here. They're trying to pay the rent in their kind of slum apartments. They're trying to make it. And she finds herself getting into S work because well, she kind of is almost duped into it. Then she finds herself in a situation of being exploited by the police. And that's what this book is exploring. It's exploring a real story, but like a real concept that's then fictionalized through this this protagonist's story. And in this, we see, so much social commentary that I feel like everybody should read this book. I feel like what happened to this girl and what happens is real, and it needs to be understood in the extremely nuanced and profound ways in which Leila Motley does this work. And she also took the time to, show romance, show joy, show hope. And I love that was never a loss. So this didn't read like sort of like trauma porn. This read like, we got to keep it real. We've got to confront these realities. And inside of the darkest reality, there's also moments of joy and hope and love and belonging. There's a sapphic romance in here that I find just, it's budding and it's floundering and it's beautiful. And this is absolutely just a work of social justice, and writing it and reading it, I believe, is, and I would say the same about Cantores. So I highly recommend this, and so did Oprah. So I guess my recommendation is maybe less needed. The last book I'm going to talk about in the longest video ever is Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is also a multi-generational family story, and I just found it snappy and feminist and fun. And it was surprised, and I loved listening to it. It had multiple readers for the different characters. We have lots of aunties and a grandma and then cousins, and they all have some kind of magic power or gift. And it's really exciting to see them stick together as a family, manage bad men, disappointing. Let me say that. Manage men who are disappointing and relationships with disappointing men, which seems to be a theme throughout almost every book that I've read in this giant pile. And then come together, find community, find each other, deal with grief, let love win. I get book of the month, pick this up. So it's got its accolades, but I don't know why. I got this from a Goodwill, and I don't know, what made me draw to it. I came into it pretty blind. And again, this was such a great hybrid read. And I had such a great time with it. So Latin and Hispanic Heritage Month is coming up soon. If you haven't got this on your TBR, you haven't read it yet, maybe read it then. It's a fun read.